I couldn't think of a better place to end this video than right here in the middle of the woods, the Battle of the Wilderness, at the hotly contested Brocken Plank Road, Orange Plank Road. Not too far in that direction, Longstreet's wounded. Right here where I'm at right now is a place where men like Wadsworth and Hayes end up losing their lives. Families lose loved ones. Soldiers burn to death in these fields around me here. If you let these fields do it, they'll touch your soul. All right, well, we're going live here, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Today we have a pretty good lineup here, I'd say. Author Tom McMillan's with us, and Chris from Vlogging Through History. He's got a really exceptional channel, pretty huge following too there, Chris. Vlogging Through History. You've been online since 2016, correct?
Yeah, I started a gaming channel in 2016 and then Vlogging Through History at the end of 2020, right in the middle of COVID.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty big. That's it picked up pretty fast there at that time too. And then Tom McMillan here, you wrote one of my all-time favorite books, which was Gettysburg Rebels, and that's really the first time I reached out to you was because of that book. I wanted to speak to you about it, and then maybe get you to answer a few questions for me, and you graciously did. I really appreciated that. So how you fellas doing?
Great, glad to be here. Glad to meet Chris for the first time. I certainly knew of him, but it's great to meet him. I'm disappointed he's a West Brom fan. And
you're not a Steelers fan too, are you?
No.
Oh, okay, because I know you have a Pittsburgh background. I'm a Browns fan.
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yeah. I don't follow the NFL much.
Oh, okay.
I follow real football.
But yeah, I'm with you there. I prefer the other kind of football. But no, I'm excited too because I'm looking forward to picking your brain a little bit, Tom, because I'm writing my first Civil War book right now. So
good.
Awesome.
Look forward to it.
So to go a little bit briefly over what Tom's done, for over 40 years, he was in sports media, and 25 years of that was spent as VP of Communications for Pittsburgh Penguins. He's written several books. The Year That Made America is coming out here soon, right? That's the newest.
Right in April, about the Declaration of Independence. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Our Flag Was Still There. That's a real exceptional book. I love that book. Armistead and Hancock, another good book, and then Flight 93, which has a lot of details in there about that I did not know about, which kind of shocked me. For example, I know recently you'd done a podcast with Addressing Gettysburg, and he asked you questions about that. And you talked to him about how the box cutters, it wasn't really razor blades. We were talking about just simple things that were used to threaten the lives of the people on that aircraft.
Well, they use knives. What happens sometimes with reporting, somebody heard that first day that there was box cutter. So, and that's now the legend. Because the media, I never blame the media on this. The first day, even the authorities don't know what's happened. You're grabbing scraps of information. Those hijackers researched our systems. They knew, as I certainly wouldn't have, that it was legal to take a knife blade of up to 4 inches onto a plane. People say, how'd they get the knives onto the plane? They put them in their pockets and walked right on. That was very legal. I wouldn't have known that, but they knew that. So there's receipts of them purchasing these types of multi-purpose tools at Lowe's and Home Depot and places like that. And that's basically what they used.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. And when I heard about that, what kind of brought it full circle for me was not too long after September 11th, and I joined the military, and then I had the opportunity to go up to New York and tour the grounds there before they opened the museum. One of the standard practices that they had there was that you could not have any small foldable knife. And I always carried a small foldable pocket knife, and they confiscated it from me that day as I was heading into the grounds. And I couldn't help but think that maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah.
So, and you have your wife, Colleen. She always is involved in everything with you. I noticed that she's out there volunteering a lot of times too.
Absolutely, yeah. We're partners in crime as history goes. It's really fun to have someone there in your life who shares the same interest as you. And we volunteered at Antietam. We both we volunteer here in Gettysburg, where we live now. We bought a place in retirement up here, and enjoy that. And she's a better researcher than I am, and has much more patience than I am, and is smarter than I am. So she contributes hugely to all the books. Keeps me on track.
Speaking as a married man, I think I can affirm that the wife usually is the smarter, more patient person. I'm
not just saying that because she might be watching.
But it can't hurt to say it.
It doesn't hurt. Well, in the book Gettysburg Rebels, you also dedicate something in there to her too, making you do it. Or something to that effect. Book,
one was the nickname was for my mom, who I said I think it's somebody like who told me to dream, and Colleen, who made sure that I did. So
that's it.
There's nothing dreaming. There's nothing to achieving that dream, and having somebody just give you a little nudge to you should do this.
That's it. So in a book like Gettysburg Rebels, I know I've talked to you myself about it, but the process to go through with writing something like this is an undertaking of epic proportions. We're talking massive amounts of research, hours and hours and hours. And a lot of people out there, they read a good book and they go, I'd like to do that. Maybe you could shed some light to the public to let them know what goes into doing this.
You have to, it's a lot of work. You have to love it. If you love it, it doesn't seem like work because you're doing it, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of research and dedication. It does. And that was Flight 93 was my first book. So, and then I thought, well, I've always been a Civil War nerd. I always come to Gettysburg. Can I write something about Gettysburg? And so I came up with this idea because I wasn't one who would have written, I wasn't going to write the 10th book on Pickett's charge. Right. I didn't want to rewrite something that had been done before. And I had this idea, or I had this knowledge that there were two guys from Gettysburg who grew up here who fought in the Confederate Army at the Battle of Gettysburg, which is absurd. How many times has that happened in the history of the world where you come back to your hometown with an invading foreign army? And it happened here. But I didn't know, I was talking to my book agent, if there was enough material on these two guys. Because what you realize too, Charlie, Chris probably know this, is we're used to generals and war heroes having a lot of papers and letters and documents. Yeah. Most guys who fought in the Civil War, privates and corporals, didn't write anything. Right. They came and they served their 3 or 4 years. They did their duty, and then they went back to life. And they didn't leave much. And if they did leave it over the years, their descendants have thrown the stuff away. So we don't have a lot of writing from most of these guys, and
probably even less for Confederates than for Unions.
And so that was it. But then in doing the research, I found out that Wesley Culp had gone south. He worked in the carriage industry. Gone south was his employer, Charles William Hoffman. But checking out the census reports, which you do when you study history, found that he had 3 children, 3 boys of Civil War age. And I went to the National Archives and looked up the records. And sure enough, all 3 of those guys who grew up in Gettysburg, a block from the town square, and then moved to Virginia, were all also in the Confederate Army. So that gave me 5 guys who grew up in this town and came back in this town. And I frustratingly never wrote anything about it, but I just thought I'm going to try to dig in and find out as much as I can. Charlie, I told you there's some things like that story is not complete and can never be complete because they didn't leave enough information. But I thought it was still intriguing enough, and I had enough to put it together. But I'm always frustrated that they didn't write about what that was like coming in. I wish I could have pried into one of their brains.
I know
what it was like. So part of that is it's theater of the mind a little bit. Present the facts as much as you can. And a story I think I told you, stop me if I'm rambling too much, but I had read when William Fresnillo, the great Gettysburg photography researcher, who I since have met and become friends with, but I didn't know him at the time. One of his books, he mentioned that there was a Culp family ancestor who had some letters from Wesley Culp. And he just mentioned it in the book. So I looked the guy up, and he had passed away, but he had 2 sons. So I cold wrote them letters. It was the only time I was trying to disassociate my professional career with the Penguins when I was working there with this. These were 2 different sides of me. I never tried to use it. The only time I ever used it was when I was writing cold letters to people. So you put it on Penguin's letterhead to show that I actually really have a job. I'm a functional human being. And I thought maybe that, I wasn't somebody sitting in an attic playing at a computer. So I did it, and one man was nice enough to write back to me, and he actually called me and he said, "Mr. McMillan, I'm not a history buff, but I have all my father's materials. You can look at it if you want." And I thought he'd let me go there with white gloves to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and look at the letters. And next day he texted me, Charlie, and he said, "Mr. McMillan, I put them in the mail to you."
Oh,
he mailed
wow.
me 4 letters written between
wow.
1860 and 1862 in the mail.
Wow.
That's what happens to non-history nerds. Like, he didn't
Wow.
realize what he had. Like, oh my God. And Colleen and I mean, your hands are shaking when you pick a letter and hold a letter that's written in 1860 from a guy that I was writing about.
Yeah.
And so now, thankfully, that family is re-engaged in the Civil War, and they have those letters back, and they're protecting them.
That's good.
I said, I'm not mailing them back to you. I'm going to hand deliver them to you. And I checked with the archivist here. This is the way to care for the letters if you don't want to go. So those are really interesting journeys. And that stuff, you know, I might have put a sense of that in the book, but there's so much when you do this stuff that you take with you that's fun, that doesn't actually make the book, but it gives so much texture to the book.
Yeah, it really does. And when I was talking to you and that first time when I was emailing you, I was amazed to hear those stories because it really added something extra to this.
Yeah.
Now, Chris, you've done research on the Civil War, and you have a channel also dedicated to the Civil War. Mm-hmm. Why do you think a soldier or a person who was living in the North and was dedicated to the Union meanders all the way down south and ends up in a Southern army and goes back north and continues to fight regardless?
I think it goes to show that, you know, we have, again, it goes back to what he's saying about how we know so much about the generals and the armies and all this stuff, but the individual soldier, the reasons why he fought is as varied as the next man. And there are a million reasons why people enlisted. And it makes, you know, most of these guys weren't thinking about the big picture. Oh, I'm fighting for the Union. Oh, I'm fighting for, you know, the institution of slavery. I'm fighting for my hometown. I'm fighting with the guys that are my buddies that went in and enlisted. And I think it's as simple as that. It really is.
Yeah. Chris, I agree. I got that question. Whenever I get talks, I still get that question about these guys. And I said, well, first of all, these 5 had moved to Virginia in the mid 1850s. It wasn't like the war broke out in 1861 and they left Gettysburg to join the Confederate Army. They lived there for 5 or 6 years. And when you're 21, that's a big chunk of your life.
Yep.
They all of them were in militia units, which is what happened back then. You did it, especially for newcomers to a town. You know, we're going to defend the town, and we're going to wear a uniform, and you're kind of cool. You're carrying a gun, and there was no social media. It's how you made friends. So those units, and particularly these guys, Wesley Culp and Robert Hoffman in Shepherdstown, their unit got absorbed into the Confederate Army. They enlisted en masse in the Confederate Army, and they became Company B of the 2nd Virginia.
Yep.
So they never wrote about why they fought. I don't know that, but I agree with you, Chris. I think at the foot soldier level, and it's nuanced. You have to be careful when you talk about this today, because everybody wants to talk about the great issue. Slavery was the reason for the Civil War, but that doesn't mean that every person at the lowest level fought. And I think a lot of these guys were just fighting with their buddies to engage and protect their hometown. I've got to believe that. Without anything written, I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a fact. And even in some of the letters that you read too from some of the soldiers that do have details in them, they say that they're fighting with their friends and their cousins and uncles and everything else. Tom, do you have anybody in your family with Civil War history? Perhaps?
Yeah, I did. I was a Civil War nerd long before I realized that. My parents had no interest in family history. I knew nothing about my genealogy. So it was about 10 or 12 years ago I started doing it. And yes, I have more than 30 people in the family tree. We're in the Union Army in some aspect.
Are they from the Pittsburgh area?
No, all over the place. Certainly some are. But my direct descendants, 2 great-great-grandfathers, one from Wisconsin, one from Ohio, were in the Civil War. I visited their graves. Again, didn't write anything, just regular foot soldiers, privates. One was a reverend and joined in.
Nice.
And then I have some from the 62nd Pennsylvania at Gettysburg who fought in Wheatfield. And one of them, one of my descendants is Thomas Espy, for whom the GAR post in Carnegie, PA is named. and was a docent there for 8 or 10 years, which felt pretty cool because you had ancestors who were in that GAR room, but it was something I didn't find out about till I was in my 50s. So sometimes it takes a while for you to learn it. My interest in the Civil War started organically, but maybe in some ways, some of my friends think maybe in some ways this is why I was drawn there.
Yeah, absolutely. So making your way across those battlefields, Chris.
Sorry, the reason I got up for a second is because I have a book on the 62nd Pennsylvania. I was looking for it because a good friend of mine, her great uncle was Samuel Black, who commanded the 62nd, was killed on the peninsula commanding the unit. He's buried in Pittsburgh. So anyway, go ahead.
So making your way out there on those fields, and you have your own personal stories with your family members. I mean, explain to the audience, as a YouTube personality, when you're bringing a video about other soldiers to the audience, what does it feel like for you when you're out there making those videos on those grounds where maybe your ancestors were actually out there fighting?
There's two stages to it for me. One is when I'm sitting here at home and I'm doing research for the videos I'm going to make. And so at that point, it's all information. It's names on a piece of paper. It doesn't hit me emotionally too much because I'm just doing the facts. Right. Then I get out there and I stand where it happened and I look back at the same information that I researched, and that's when it hits me. And the example I always use is I had a fourth great grandfather who was in the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry. Now, their monument, if you go to Gettysburg, is just to the north of the Father Corby Monument. For the Irish Brigade, because that's where they were stationed on July 2nd, guarding some artillery there. Mm-hmm. His son, so this is my fourth great grandfather, his son would be my great uncle, was in the 57th Pennsylvania, which was at the apex of Sickles Line near the Peach Orchard by the Sherfy House. Okay. Just got horribly decimated in the Peach Orchard there. You can stand where the 4th Pennsylvania Cavalry was and see the monument to the 57th Pennsylvania from there. And so that immediately makes me wonder, could my ancestor see his son's unit, and did he know that his son was out there? And it becomes very personal at that moment, because now I'm not thinking about 170,000 men fighting on this battlefield. I'm thinking about 2 guys. The story I know. Right. And that, in a lot of ways, and I think that's why I love this book about 5 Confederate soldiers, is we've had all the books about the armies and the generals and all that stuff like that. I want to know more about the individual soldier. And that's why so many of my stories, like when I go to World War I battlefields in France, I don't want to talk about the 4th Army. I want to talk about this battalion that got wiped out on July 1st, 1916, and tell you some of the stories of these guys. That to me is what connects me with history.
No, absolutely.
The stories get lost, Chris. What struck me was I couldn't figure out why nobody ever knew the story about these guys, just from human interest. That's a pretty good story, right? Whatever side of the war you're on, it's pretty good. And I often ask, well, was it not known because were they ashamed? Did they cover it up? No. One of them, Henry Wentz, it was in his bio, it was in obituary in Martinsburg, West Virginia. He was a proud Confederate soldier, and his father owned part of the battlefield at Gettysburg. And Frank Hoffman in the Washington Times, it said, from a prominent family in South Central Pennsylvania who fought for the Confederacy. So people in their families, people in their immediate circle knew of them. The thing that really frustrated me, Charlie, was when I found out that Henry Wentz, one of the Gettysburg Rebels, was back in Gettysburg in 1872 to settle his father's estate with his brothers. His signature is on those documents at the Adams County Historical Society. No one wrote anything about the former Confederate soldier coming back to Gettysburg. Were they mad at him? Did they embrace? I don't know. I can't imagine that it didn't make one little blurb in the local paper. But I could find nothing on that. And as a researcher, you bang your head against the wall. But again, Chris, that's why you do it, because even you don't find everything, but you find just enough to add to the story. And I think if we can do that, we've made progress here. And
I tell you, to piggyback off of what Tom said, when I started this project, I'm writing a book on the 20th Ohio. My initial goal was to write a book on the whole regiment. Yeah, I got so overwhelmed with how much documentation there was out there about the regiment and about some of the soldiers. I ended up narrowing it down to write a book about one company instead. And a lot of it is newspapers. And all of them are online now, like newspapers.com and newspaperarchive.com.
Yes.
It's incredible what's in those papers. I mean, the company commander for Company H, the company I'm writing about, wrote regular letters home to our local paper with the roster of the company and who everybody voted for in the presidential election and how much money each of them sent home to their families. And
that's a lot.
Really cool stuff. But it's still the stuff you don't know. It's like, oh, they wrote so much, but why couldn't they have done this? And one thing you wish they would have told you.
And you realize they weren't that impressed with themselves.
No,
that's just true. What they did. This was another phase of life, and they went back and did their jobs, and they never thought about writing or sharing the stories. And I'm sure you always hear soldiers, World War II. My dad, you don't want to talk about. They don't talk about their war experiences. That's true too. I think from we've been through that, but they just didn't leave much behind. Yeah. There's so much. There's so much we can. People will say, "You go to Gettysburg all the time. You live there. Can't you? Don't you know everything?" No. We know this much.
You never know
exactly,
and that's why we all keep coming back, and why we all keep doing this. And the other thing I think it's important when you're doing this, and you guys know this, but for Charlie, you'd asked about writing books and researching books. You also just can't take one single factoid for granted as true.
Yeah.
The story of Wesley Culp is that he was killed on July 3rd on Culp's Hill, which is a farm owned by his uncle. And none of those three things are true.
He was killed on the Spangler farm, wasn't he?
He was killed he was probably killed on Wolf Hill. He was killed on the morning of July 2nd. But I found this out in that his military records say he was killed on July 3rd. But the Confederate Army lost this battle and they're leaving. Do you think they had a lot of time to do proper records? He was the only guy in his unit. It was a letter that through the Fresnillo connection that his niece had written, the story of Wesley Culp, heard from her mother. And they talked about a soldier coming to their house in Gettysburg on the night of July 3rd to tell them that their brother had been killed the morning before on the skirmish line and said where it was. Yeah. And so now, is that true? I take that more as gospel than what somebody wrote in a record when you're.
Isn't there a story about like the butt of a rifle having his name on it or something?
They found the butt of his rifle, the broken butt of his rifle. And I think my theory on that, I've run past a couple of Gettysburg guides and they say, yeah, that probably makes sense. They found on Culp's Hill. They were told by this Confederate soldier that Wesley was killed on Culp's Hill. The Confederates had never been here before. Everything was Culp's Hill. Yeah. We know he didn't fight there, but they fought there later. And so how did the gun get there? He was the only man in his unit killed during the battle. With their lack of guns and fire, do you think they just let a functioning musket lay on the ground? No, I think somebody picked it up. They were there on July 3rd, and how it got broken, I don't know. But there was his stock was that says W. Culp, the gun stock that he used. Erie.
It's pretty amazing. And I think, honestly, I think it's a generational thing too, because in those days, everyone was quick to try to preserve portions of that battlefield. But they had veterans constantly coming back, and the conversations that were happening between them and the veterans were not actually being documented. They were not writing about this stuff. And I remember as a kid, I must have probably visited, I don't know how many World War II veterans and talked to them. And my school even one time had a survivors or a descendant of a survivor of the Titanic come out to our school to speak to us. I don't remember what they told me because I didn't think to write this stuff down. And I can only imagine the masses were there to see the spectacle, but they weren't actually writing down what they saw or what was being talked about.
Yeah.
And as time went on, a lot of people, especially when they started having those reunions at Gettysburg, every veteran fought at Gettysburg, whether they actually did or not.
Right.
I think history, when it happens, people often don't recognize. It's years later that you realize what that meant. Remember, the war's still going on for 2 more years. We viewed it as the crucial battle of the war. They didn't know that back then.
Yeah.
Right.
They didn't know that. Other than the Union soldiers knowing it was the one time they fought on their own soil, so that was going to be special. But other than that, who knew what the result of the war was going to be at that point? You don't know where it's going to fit. I bet you the book I'm just doing that's coming out in April, the Declaration of Independence, our most hallowed document. It means nothing if we don't win the Revolutionary War.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, at the moment, and one of the frustrating things there is at the time, they didn't write a lot about it in July 1776.
Well, and in July 1776, things were going not particularly well in the war.
Exactly. So when you're piecing these things together, whatever history you're researching, you have to take that in context, and look at all those things too. But to your point earlier, Charlie, on the research, writing's fun, but research is at least half the fun.
Oh,
at least half. And if it's not, if you don't like that, then you won't ever write a book, because that's part of it. You dig into and you find things that as I mentioned before, that will never see the light of day in the book, but it gives you context to understand what happened. You can't throw every fact you find out in the book.
Tom, I have a question for you about that. Did you ever get to the point where you had to finally decide, I need to start writing this and start researching?
Every time.
I'm going to find one more thing before I start writing.
Every time. In fact, Chris, what I do, I've read, talked to, other authors who do it differently. I always get to the point, I do some of my research and I have to start writing. Yeah. I have to, even though I know my research isn't finished, I have to start writing. I do it. And there are times when I've gone back and had to change things because I found something that changed my perspective. But it's almost like, if you don't start writing at some point, you could research forever. You will never find every point of anything. I could still be researching the Declaration of Independence. I could still be researching Gettysburg Rebels. At some point, you just have to do it. And this is what I found. And I probably made some mistakes. The other thing you understand too, you can't write 300, 400 pages and not make a mistake. We're human beings. And there's always somebody out there in the history field, usually people who've never even attempted to write a book, they pour through your book to find out your mistake, and they can't wait.
Right. We call them thread counters.
Just in case you made this little
counters.
Fortunately, I haven't made a major blunder that anybody's pointed out. The little things are insignificant, but people love to point them out. So all the folks out there, like the Declaration book will be out in April. You can start reading and tell me what I got wrong.
So, folks, we got a question from Estella Beard. It says, do you know if the soldiers were as eager to preserve other battlefields besides Gettysburg?
Vicksburg, definitely. I mean, all the guys that fought out in the West, because those guys weren't at Gettysburg, so they needed their own version of that. And I think Vicksburg and Chickamauga are both very heavily preserved, and a lot of monuments to a lot of the units that fought in those battlefields.
Yeah, I remember Vicksburg and Gettysburg, Union victories. The Union soldiers after the war wanted to preserve it. The Confederates had lost the war. They didn't have any money. The states didn't have any money. So that's why we've lost a lot of the things. Thanks God for Civil War buffs, there's enough. We have what we have, but we don't have a lot because of that. I do think in Gettysburg, because it was, quote, in the North, it was in Union territory, that people knew that this was going to be one that would be remembered. People here in Gettysburg certainly did. And then the other thing that added to it was Gettysburg Address. I often wonder how we'd look at the battle if the Gettysburg Address hadn't been given here, because that's what really made it iconic in American history, the battle and then the speech.
Well, and as far as battlefields are concerned, the battlefields that I look at as the most preserved and probably the greatest battlefields we have is Shiloh, Vicksburg, Chickamauga, Gettysburg, and Antietam.
Yeah.
The other battlefields that are out there are in bits and pieces, and the American Battlefield Trust are doing the best they can to try to preserve as much of the field as possible. But when it comes to, preservation and being able to step into place and see the place for what it really was, those are the places that are really preserved the best. And I always called Chickamauga the Gettysburg of the West, really, especially when we talk about monuments.
Yeah. Well, and to your point too, with Antietam, where Colleen and I both volunteered, love that battlefield, love going down. There are less than 100 monuments at Antietam. There are 1,300 monuments and markers at Gettysburg. So if you were at both places, those regiments only had so much money, they were going to put their monument at Gettysburg.
Yeah. Well, and you have a few exceptions to that. Ones like what is it, the 12th Massachusetts? Some of the ones who for them Antietam was the bigger memorable.
But generally, I think that gives the 1,300 to 90 some.
What's amazing about Antietam, and one of the reasons like a battlefield like Antietam or like Shiloh, is that they haven't been commercialized the way Gettysburg was for so long. Right. And so for me, especially Shiloh, it looks so much like it did then. Like it's really easy to picture the battle happening at a place like Shiloh or Antietam, because you don't have that.
In Antietam, the National Park Service didn't get most of that land until the 1990s. It was farmed from 1862 until the 1990s. That's why it looks like farmland. It has been farmland, and it wasn't. And we go back, because I get, friends, I live in Gettysburg and volunteer at Antietam, so everybody goes back at one another. We love both places. And there's something to be said for both of them. I do say the folks at Antietam, Gettysburg is commercialized, and it has McDonald's and swimming pools, but families need things to do. That's why it gets more busy.
Antietam, there's not much there.
But I agree, for the pure Civil War scholar, student, nerd, Antietam, a place like Antietam is just spectacular, because you feel like you're standing there in 1862.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, also on top of everything, I want to talk about something else that's outside of the book, outside of Civil War. A lot of people don't know this about you, Tom, but you do more than just authoring. I mean, you've had a career in media, you've had that whole background, and then you became an author. But you spend an awful lot of time on roundtables, discussion panels, teaching, educating, and volunteering. What is that schedule like for you?
Well, sometimes I've been retired for a few years now. Sometimes I find, where did I find the time to work? I don't know how that, but the thing is, I've been able to stay. We both have stayed very busy, but it's doing things that you want to do on your own schedule. You do it when you still do it when you want to do. If I'm too busy, it's my own fault, because I don't have to do any of this stuff. But I think, when you write books, roundtables, even though they're diminishing, still need speakers, and people, reach out to you and they want you to come. And now, I mean, imagine we could not have met, the three of us, even 20 years ago. You were a Civil War student, you went to battlefields, read books, and maybe went to a roundtable on the second Thursday night of a month. But that was the only, and then in your own town, that was the only way to interact. There was no way to interact with somebody, if you lived in Pennsylvania, to interact with somebody in Virginia on a regular basis. So I think this is, this has picked it up too. And I've met so many friends via social media, via this. Charlie, you guys, just as an example. And there are other people who I've never met, but I feel like I know them, because you follow them and you see what's going on. I feel like I know that person. If we sit down and had a beer, we could have a long conversation. Mm-hmm. That'll be my podcast partner. We do a podcast in Antietam, John Banks. We're both from Pittsburgh. We're about the same age. We grew up about 10 miles from one another. We both worked in sports media. Yeah, we didn't meet each other until 3 years ago, because we did because of the John Banks blog. So we're that close and that parallel, and yet we were in parallel lives, even with this intense Civil War interest. So it's you can reach out and find it now. So, Chris, I'm gonna ask you this question, and then I'm gonna ask Tom to follow up with his answer as well. With life, and I asked Marty Morgan this the other day, with life being so fleeting, with it being so short, why do you think it is that we take such an obsession in something like history when we don't even know what our own history is going to be? I think the way you frame that question is really interesting, because I think that actually kind of answers the question, is that we want to, I think deep down, want to believe that we're going to do something that is remembered as well. One of the things I constantly say, when I do World War I battle stuff, is almost all my videos end with the same line: "We will remember them." It comes from a poem that was written, from the going down of the sun into the or going up of the sun into the setting of the same. We will remember them. And telling the stories of some of these guys that otherwise maybe don't get remembered, is important, because in the end, I hope that I'm remembered when I'm gone, and I hope that I leave something that leaves an impact on somebody, not just through my kids, but now through this, platform that I've been given to be able to teach people history. But I think we connect to history because we see ourselves in it, and we find ourselves wondering, what would I have done? Who would I have been? What side would I have been on? How would I have handled this situation? And there's a lot we can learn about ourselves and all of that. For sure. Yeah. That's a great answer, Chris. I was thinking, people often ask me about my interest in history and where it started. I said, I don't know. It's just, it's a feeling. It wasn't something I said, I am going to be interested in history. I would like to be interested in history. I compare it to if you go out and you're at a battlefield and or anywhere and you feel that something great happened. I do. I love walking where things happen. I feel there. The video that started, Charlie. These fields speak to you. The Flight 93 press site speaks to you. The Independence Hall speaks to me. But there are people who will tell me, "Up to Gettysburg again? Do you just read the monuments?" If you just want someone who reads the monuments, then you don't get it. And that's okay. That's not a negative, but you don't get it. I'll never be able to break through to you as to why I like this. I think that's the difference. Those of us who feel, I love going to places. Colleen and I, the last couple of years, went, on tours of D-Day and Battle of the Bulge, and just to be at those places you've heard about all your lives. I still have Pearl Harbor, still a bucket list for me because something happened there. That's what draws me. But I do think leaving something for yourself, that's how I feel with books. I pick up, you do research and you find some really obscure books that help you. One sentence of a book that was written in 1872. I'm thinking maybe in the year 2197, somebody will pick up Gettysburg Rebels. Who's this guy, McMillan? I learned something from here. So maybe you've left something a little bit that way.
Exactly. Yeah, those are both really great answers for sure. And, Marty had a pretty interesting answer too. So fellas, I know you guys got a really busy schedule. What is up and coming for you guys here in the near future?
For me, I think I mentioned I'm going to the UK next week with my son for a football trip. We're going to 3 games while we're over there. We're going to be bouncing from Birmingham to Glasgow, Scotland, down to London. Then in 3 weeks, I'll be in Egypt. So I'm pretty excited about that. Going to be in Egypt for a week, leading a group tour there. Next Civil War event for me, though, is Appomattox 160. I've never been to Appomattox before. So I booked my hotel a year ago.
You'll love it.
Be there for the 160th anniversary. So I'm pretty excited about that. And just trying to find time to write this book on the 20th Ohio. The reason I asked you about that research stuff, Tom, is because that's where I'm at right now. Is I have researched, and I've got piles and piles and so many documents in Google Docs that I've compiled, and I know I need to start writing, but I just keep researching.
No, I would say, because you can keep researching as you write. That's the only way I can do it. I need to get started to feel that part of it, and then you can take a break and research some more. I would strongly, and I think Appomattox, Colleen and I went there a few years ago. It's out in the middle of nowhere. We had low expectations. We just wanted to check the box and be there. Blown away with the job they did. Nice. It was fantastic. And it was just a random day. It wasn't an anniversary. So.
And I should mention too, speaking of Gettysburg, we do have the Gettysburg Film Festival coming up May 8th through 11th. I'm one of the media partners for that. And so we actually just had a Zoom call about it the other day. And let me tell you, some incredible stuff that they haven't even announced yet about who might be there.
Nice.
I know who is going to be there. Martin Sheen's coming back.
Nice.
And let me tell you, and I will say this every time I get the opportunity, by far the nicest man I've ever met in my life. Martin Sheen is a ridiculously generous and kind guy. And I'm so glad he's coming back to Gettysburg, because everybody who was at the film festival last year had the exact same experience with him.
Oh, yeah.
But we've got some other names that are even bigger than that fingers are crossed might be coming. But either way, it's going to be an incredible event. Ken Burns is going to be there, and he's got his Revolutionary War documentary that's out now. So.
Nice. Yeah, and work with those guys, because the 26th they're talking about doing the Flight 93, the United 93 movie, to do something on the 25th anniversary of 9/11.
Oh, wow!
They're thinking ahead. The Adams County Historical Society is doing a fantastic.
Oh yeah,
this year it's World War II.
Andrew, who's in charge of that, is just incredible, and of course Tim Smith is amazing too.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. How about you, Tom? What you got going on?
Well, the Declaration book is coming out in April, so I'll be pumping that as much as I can. And have about 6 or 7 speaking engagements scheduled up already. So that's what happens, including at Adams County Historical Society. And then I am, of course, Charlie, you wouldn't be surprised to know I'm working on my 6th book, which will come out on the 25th anniversary of 9/11. It's a 9/11 topic. That I'd done so much research on that, and I had so many files already. Chris, sometimes you have things you can repurpose. So I thought for the 25th anniversary. So I'm hitting the 250th of the United States and the 25th of 9/11. So I always tell Colleen this will be my last book. And she said, yeah, sure.
It's your last one until the next one.
Yeah.
as kind of like videos.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, fellas, I really appreciate you coming on here, and to all the audience members out there that that put questions up and have been coming back and watching and all that good stuff. Without people to watch these videos, they really don't mean anything. So I appreciate everybody coming out and watching these. And Tom, I appreciate you being on here and your busy schedule and talking to us. And Chris, you as well. Thank you both
pleasure.
very much.
Charlie,
All
Chris,
right.
thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thanks,
take
everyone.
care.
All right, so Tom, where exactly would Henry have been located during this battle in front of us here?
About 600 yards away from the house, that tree line over there, where the kind of the Longstreet Tower is the marker, a little closer to the road. Those guys, the marker for Taylor's Virginia Battery is there. So if you visit there, you see Taylor's Virginia Battery marker, that's where Henry was, and then they charged across the field toward this house.
And so he actually owned this portion of land that's out front here?
Yeah, his father owned this part. His father also owned a 9-acre rectangular plot right across the road there. In 1850, he transferred that to Henry's ownership. We think he probably felt that Henry was getting some wanderlust, was going to leave, wanted to anchor him here in Gettysburg. So Henry owned that land. There's no record that he ever sold it until 1872. He didn't use it, but he officially owned it. So when they charged across the field, he was not only charging toward the house where he grew up, he was charging over land that he personally owned.